On a scorching June afternoon in 1876, the rolling plains of southeastern Montana witnessed one of the most shocking military disasters in American history. Here, along the winding banks of the Little Bighorn River, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and over 200 of his men would meet their end in a battle so fierce, so unexpected, that it would send shockwaves across a nation celebrating its centennial. This was not just another skirmish in the ongoing Indian Wars. This was a collision between two worlds that would be remembered as Custer's last stand and mark both the greatest victory and the beginning of the end for the Plains Indian way of life. The stage for this epic confrontation was set years before the first shot was fired. In the heart of the Black Hills of South Dakota lay a secret that would change everything. These sacred mountains, promised to the Lakota Sioux by the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie, held more than spiritual significance. They contained gold. When prospectors discovered the precious metal in 1874, the treaty became nothing more than paper thousands wind. In the fortune seekers poured into the Black Hills, trampling over sacred ground and violating the solemn promises made by the United States government. The man who would lead this final charge into history was no ordinary cavalry officer. George Armstrong Custer had his name into the and already. Carvils of American military legend, long before he ever set foot on the Montana plains. Born in Ohio in 1839, Custer's path to fame began at West Point, where he distinguished himself not for failure. He academic excellence, but for spectacular, graduated dead last in his class of 1,861, accumulating a record-breaking 726 demerits that marked him as one of the most traubaldets in Assumpke the Academy's history. Yet what appeared to be a disastrous start would prove to be merely the prelude to an extraordinary military career. The Civil War transformed this rebellious young officer into a national hero. At the impossibly young age of 23, Custer became the youngest general in the Union Army, earning his promotion through audacious courage and an almost supernatural ability to survive desperate charges. His flowing golden hair, flamboyant uniforms, and theatrical presence made him instantly recognizable on any battlefield. During the Battle Gettysburg, he commanded the Michigan Cavalry Brigade with such distinction that his reputation spread throughout both armies. His men followed him not just out of duty, but out of genuine admiration for a leader who never asked them to go where he would not leave war explode. Custer's civiled, like something it's Rhea from a romantic novel. During Sheridan's General Philip Shenandoah campaign, he led thunderous cavalry Confederate lines, charges that broke and helped secure Union victory. At the Third Battle of Winchester, Custer inured his men for war a devastating assault, later recalling how officers and men seemed to compete for who could lead the charge. The enemy delivered a well-directed volley, but before they could fire a second time, Custer's cavalry was among them, sabering right and left in a display of martial fury that became his trademark. His pursuit of Robert E. Lee's retreating Army of Northern Virginia in the war's final days helped bring about the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. When the guns finally fell silent in April 1865, Custer stood as one of the Union's most celebrated commanders, a golden-haired warrior whose name was synonymous with victory and glory. The transition from Civil War hero to Indian fighter would prove far more challenging than anyone could have imagined. On the vast plains of the American West, Custer faced enemies unlike any he had encountered in Virginia or Pennsylvania. The Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and their allies were not demoralized. Confederate soldiers retreating toward inevitable defeat. These warriors fighting for their homeland, their family's way of life. Leading, and their very them, were two of the most formidable military minds the Plains tribes had ever produced. Was more the Hunkpapa Lac Sitting Bull of than just a war chief. He was a holy man, a visionary leader whose spiritual authority matched his political influence. Born around 1831, Sitting Bull Ha life watching, spent his entire the steadied soldiers into encroachment of white settlers and many other tribal lands. Unlike chiefs who had chosen accommodation with deed states government the Unite, Sitting Bull remained steadfast in his opposition to any compromise that would surrender traditional hunting grounds or people onto reservations. His anti-stance had earned him followers' treaty, forces from across the Sioux Nation and 1,869 beyond. He held the unprecedented title of Supreme Leader of the Autonomous Bands of Lakota, first person ever Sioux to wield such authority. His influence extended far beyond his own tribe warriors, from the drawing Arapaho and Cheyenne nations, who saw in him a leader capable of uniting the scattered bands into a force that could resist American expansion. Alongside Sitting Bull stood Crazy Horse, the Oglala war leader, whose very name struck fear into the hearts of soldiers and settlers alike. Born in the Black Hills in 1841, Crazy Horse had grown into a warrior whose tactical brilliance was matched only by his unwavering commitment to the traditional ways of his people. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he rejected the trappings of white civilization entirely, never learning to read or write, never posing for photographs, and never setting foot on a reservation until the very end. Crazy Horse's approach to warfare was revolutionary. Where other war leaders might charge headlong into battle, he employed sophisticated tactics that confused and overwhelmed his enemies. His vision quest as a young man had shown him the path of the plainman, wearing Orr's simple clothes and a single feather, sprinkling dust over his horse before battle, and placing a stone behind his ear for protection. This spiritual guidance, combined with his natural military genius, made him perhaps the most dangerous opponent the United States Army would face on the plains. The discovery of gold in the Black Hills had set in motion a chain of events that made conflict inevitable. The United States government, unwilling to remove the thousands of miners who had flooded into Sioux territory and unable their saker to convince the tribes to sell lands, issued an ultimatum that would echo all across the plains to their designate Indians must return reservations by the 31st of January 1876, or be deemed hostile and subject to military action. For Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and their followers, this ultimatum represented everything they had been fighting against. The reservations were not homes beautisans, places PR where proud hunters and warriors would be reduced to begging for government rations and watching their children forget the ways of their ancestors. The choice was clear. Submit to a all of dependency, life, and cultural death, or stand and fight for the freedom that had defined Plains Indian life for generations. As winter gave way to spring in 1876, the decision was made. Rather to the reservations, the Van Report tribes began gathering in unprecedented numbers. Sitting Bull sent out messengers to reservations across the region, calling on all who still possessed the warrior spirit to join him in Montana. The response was overwhelming. By late spring, more than 10,000 Native Americans had assembled along the banks of the Little Bighorn River, which they called the Greasy Grass. This massive encampment represented something that had never been seen before on tribes that the plains, different had sometimes fought each other now, stood united under common leadership, sharing resources and coordinating their efforts against the approaching storm. The gathering included not just warriors but entire families, creating a mobile city that stretched for miles along the riverbank. The Unite was States Army, meanwhile preparing its own response to what it saw as a massive Indian uprising. General Philip Sheridan, commander of the military division of the Missouri, devised an ambitious strategy that would commit 1,000 troops to a several coordinated campaign design, Indian resistance once to crush Plains and for all. The three-pronged assault that Sheridan designed was meant to trap the combined Indian forces like prey caught between converging hunters. From Fort Abraham Lincoln in North Dakota, General Alfred Terry would lead the Dakota West Columnward with over 500 men, including Custer and all 12 7th Cavalry. Colonel companies of the John Gibbon would command the Montana Column, marching eastward from Fort Ellis. From the south, General George Crook would drive north from Fort Fetterman with a third force. The plan seemed flawless on paper. 3 columns of experienced soldiers would sweep across the territory, pinning the hostile tribes between an end crushing any resistance in a single decisive campaign. The plains would prove far more treacherous than any map. The first could reveal crack in this gran appeared on strategy June 17th, when General Crook encountered Crazy Horse and his warriors Rosebud. What at the Battle of the should have been a routine engagement turned into a stunning defeat for the United States forces. Crazy Horse had traditional turn Indian tactics on their head, organizing his warriors into coordinated units that struck with precision and withdrew the soldiers before could respond effectively. The battle raged for hours across the rolling countryside, complete, with neither side able to claim victory, but Crook's column was soddied and blood demoralized that he withdrew from the campaign entirely. The defeat at Rosebud sent shockwaves through the remaining. Column Sook's retreat meant that one entire arm of Sheridan's pincer movement had been severed, leaving Terry and Gibbon to face the full strength of the Indian coalition with reduced numbers and no support from the south. Yet the campaign pressed forward, driven by the momentum of preparation of months and the unwavering confidence of officers who believed that disciplined troops with superior weapons school of Indian warriors overcome any number. As Terry's column pushed into Montagnard deeper territory, scouts brought disturbing reports of the enemy. The Indian encampment along the Little Bighorn was much larger than any army intelligence had anticipated. He estimated Sitting Bull's force at perhaps 800 fighting men with infantry, but the reality presented a very different picture. Smoke from countless fires rose from a village that stretched for miles, and the dust clouds kicked up by the massive pony herds suggested a gathering of unprecedented size. On June 21st, Terry held a council of war aboard boat Fard the steam west, moored at the mouth of the Rosebud River. The plan that emerged from this meeting would seal the fate of the 7th Cavalry. Terry would take Gibbon's infantry and march up the Bighorn River to block any escape route to the north. Meanwhile, Custer would lead his cavalry south along the Rosebud, then swing west to attack the Indian village from the south, driving the tribes toward Terry's waiting forces. The plan relied on precise timing and coordination between forces by dozens separate of miles of rough terrain. Terry gave Custer considerable sea latitude in his approach, telling his own him to use judgment about when and how to attack. This flexibility, meant to account for the unpredictable nature of Indian warfare, would prove to be a fatal mistake. Custer's aggressive nature and hunger for glory made it almost certain that he would attack at the first opportunity, regardless of the tactical situation. Before the Battle of the Little Bighorn, a remarkable event would Gal's spiritual forces unfolded that anvanized the Indian, provide them with their coming. During victoriable confidence of the most sacred rituals of the Sundance ceremony, one Plains Indian culture, Sitting Bull underwent an ordeal that would become legendary among his people. For 36 hours, he rested, making danced without sacrifice, 50 cuts initial each, an arm as offering to the Great Spirit. When exhaustion finally overcame him he collapsed in trance. He emerged with a vision that electrified the entire camp. In his vision, Sitting Bull saw soldiers falling from the sky like grasshoppers, tumbling headfirst into the Indian camp in numbers that the such ground was covered with their bodies. The holy man interpreted this as a divine promise of victory, a sign that the spirits themselves had chosen to oppress us. News of the vision spread against their war with the tribes. The huge, restless camp spread like wildfire, turning into true warriors. Now the cavalry was ready, confidently facing the war with the strength of men who believed they were carrying out the will of the gods themselves. The psychological Sitting Bull's vision cannot be overest impact fated. In a culture where spiritual guidance was considered as important as tactical planning, the holy man's prophecy provided the kind of motivation that no amount of training or equipment could match. Warriors painted their faces and prepared their weapons with the calm assurance of men who knew the outcome battle before it began. The vision had transformed a defensive gathering into an offensive force, ready to meet the enemy with unprecedented unity and determination. As June 25 Ned clearth door and hot over the Montana plains, both armies moved toward their appointment with destiny. Custer's column had been marching through the night, following the trail left by the massive Indian village moving toward the Little Bighorn. The dust and lefty debris by thousands of people and animals created a path so obvious that even Perion's trackers could follow it. As the sun climbed higher, Custer's Crow and Arikara scouts began of the enemy camp, reporting glimp in the distance. From ridge high, a crow called Thee's Nest, the P scouts down into the valley of the Little Bighorn and saw something that filled with dread. The Indian village stretched them far as the eye could see, without a smoke rising from what appeared to be 1,000 stages. The P of low numbered in the Tensony herds alone, indication that clear of thousands, add of warriors, but this was no ordinary band, an unprecedented gathering tribes. The scouts of the plains urged caution, warning Custer that the enemy force was far larger than anyone had imagined, but their concerns fell on deaf ears. Custer's confidence unshaken remained, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that his regiment was vastly outnumbered. His experience in the Civil War had taught him that aggressive action could overcome numerical disadvantages, and his success at the Battle of the Washita in 1868 had reinforced his belief that Indian villages could be quickly overwhelmed by a determined cavalry charge. The possibility that this gathering from might be different, any he had previously encountered, seemed not to his mind. The Custer's decision came when had been cross-hunting scouts reported that they fatal the main party's returning F-camp, spotted by Indianeering, that the element Todd, that the tribes of surprise had been lost and would scatter before he planned to could attack. Custer abandoned his original's column for Terry, and wait decide immediately. It to strike was a decision born of impatience and ambition, a gamble that would cost him everything he had spent a lifetime building. At noon on June 25th, 1876, Custer made the fateful decision that would echo through history. Splitting his already outnumbered regiment into 3 battalion separations, he assigned Major Marcus Reno to lead 3 companies in a direct assault on the southern end of the village. Captain Frederick Benteen would take 3 more companies on a scouting mission to the southwest, searching for Indian seeing in who might be flest that direction. Companies in what Custer himself would command 5 would be the decisive, he believed, strike from the north, while the pack train with supplies and ammunition would be guarded by the remaining company under Captain Thomas McDougall. The division of forces flew in the face of every principle of military tactics. Against an enemy of unknown strength, occupying favorable terrain, Custer had chosen to fragment his command into isolated units that support could not each other. His plan relied on the same strategy that had brought him victory at, but the circumstances Washita 8 years earlier could not have been more different. At Washita, he had attacked a small winter village, caught completely by surprise. Here, he faced the largest gathering of plains warriors in history, alert and ready for battle. As Reno's battalion splashed across the Little Bighorn River and formed up for the charge, the true magnitude of their situation became terrifyingly clear. What intelligence reports had described as 800 warriors was revealed to be a force of nearly 3,000 seasoned fighters. The village stretched for more than 3 miles along the riverbank, with circles of lodges representing not just Lakota Sioux, but Cheyenne, Arapaho, and warriors from tribes across the northern plains. The dust kicked up by their massive pony herds created clouds that obscured the horizon, while the sound of war cries and drumming filled the air with an ominous rhythm. Reno's charge began with a thunderous pounding of hooves as his 175 men raced toward the village at full gallop. For a brief moment, it seemed as though cavalry, the traditional assault, might succeed. The warriors appeared to be retreating, drawing the soldiers deeper into what looked like a successful attack. But this apparent withdrawal was a tactical masterpiece, orchestrated by Crazy Horse and his war leaders. The retreat was calculated to design the cavalry into a killing ground where superior would be brought numbers cool to bear with devastating effect. The trap was sprung with deadly precision. As Reno's men charged into the southern end of the village, hundreds of warriors emerged from concealed positions along the riverbank and in the surrounding hills. The soldiers found themselves surrounded on 3 sides, facing enemy that fought on with a coordination and discipline that shattered every preconception about Indian warfare. These were not third bands, scattery of raiders' army that officers had faced in previous campaigns. This was a unified military force fighting for the survival of their way of life. The ferocity of the Indian counterattack overwhelmed Reno's battalion within minutes. Warriors armed with repeating rifles and traditional weapons struck from multiple directions, turning the cavalry charge into a desperate struggle for survival. Reno, realizing that his position was hopeless, ordered a retreat the timber to along the river. But even this defensive position proved untenable as warriors infiltrated the woods and began picking off soldiers one by one. In a panic that would haunt him for the rest of his life, Reno ordered an immediate withdrawal across the river to the bluffs on the eastern bank. What followed was not a tactical retreat but a rout. Soldiers abandoned their wounded comrades and fled in terror as warriors pursued them to the water's edge. Men and horses tumbled into the river together, some drowning under the weight of their equipment, others cut down by arrows and bullets as they struggled to reach the far shore. The survivors who made it to the bluffs found themselves trapped in an exposed position with no cover and dwindling ammunition. Of the 175 men who had confidence less than and charged into the valley with such hour earlier, more than 40 lay dead or wounded. The remainder huddled behind whatever meager cover they could find, listening to the sounds of battle echoing from the north where Custer had disappeared with companies. Meanwhile, his Custer's battalion had ridden along the eastern bluffs overlooking the Little Bighorn, searching for a crossing point that would allow them to strike the village from an unexpected direction. From their elevated position, the officers could see the full extent of the Indian encampment spread out below them like a vast city. Lodge stretched along after the river, with thousands of people moving between them in what appeared to be organized for battle rather preparation than the panic that Custer had expected. The sight should have given even the most confident commander pause, but Custer pressed forward with the same aggressive instincts that had served him so well during the Civil War. He sent messages to Benteen, ordering him to abandon his scouting mission and bring ammunition from the pack train. But these urgent requests for support would arrive changed too late to the outcome of what was already unfolding descend. As Custer's men towed the river, what would later tale be known as Medicine Coulee, they encountered their first serious resistance. Warriors hidden along the bank's open accuracy, forcing the cavalry fire with deadly to dismount and fight on foot. The soldiers, trained for mounted combat, found themselves at a severe disadvantage against an enemy that used the terrain with masterful skill. The fighting intensified as more warriors arrived contest to the crossing. Crazy Horse had left the battle against Reno to other leaders, and Ward was now moving with a large force to intercept Custer's advance. The Oglala war chief recognized that this was the moment of decision, the opportunity to strike a blow that would res beyond the Banksonet far. Custer's tactical of the Little Bighorn River situation deteriorated rapidly as his under-fire men came from multiple directions. The river crossing that had appeared feasible from a distance proved to be a deadly funnel where warriors could concentrate their fire. Casualties mounted among the cavalrymen, and ammunition began to run low as the soldiers found themselves trapped between the river and the advancing enemy. Recognizing that his position at the crossing was untenable, Custer ordered a withdrawal to higher ground. His battalion fought its way up the slopes toward what would become known as Last Stand Hill, a ridge that offered some defensive advantage but was still within range of Indian marksmen. The movement was conducted under constant fire, with warriors harassing the soldiers from all sides and picking off stragglers who fell behind. The retreat to the hill marked phase of the battle, the beginning of the final. Custer's men, many of them already wounded, found themselves surrounded by an ever-growing number of warriors who seemed to emerge from a rough fold in the landscape. The soldiers formed defensive perimeter, but their position was hopeless from the start. Outnumbered by, they were more than 10 to 1, running low on ammunition and facing an enemy that had been preparing for this moment for months. The end came with shocking swiftness. As they'd in from all directions warriors close disciple, the cavalry-signed resistance crumbled into desperate individual struggles for survival. Some soldiers tried to break out of the encirclement, only to be ridden down before they could travel more than a few yards. Others fought hand-to-hand with knives and pistols as their rifles ran out of ammunition. Custer himself fell somewhere in the final minutes of the battle, though the exact circumstances of his death would remain a matter of debate for generations. Some accounts placed him at the center of the last defensive stand, fighting with his trademark courage until overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Others suggested he had been killed earlier in the engagement while trying to rally his men for a counterattack. When the guns finally fell silent, not a single member of Custer's immediate command remained alive. The golden-haired general who had survived battles during countless the Civil War, who had charged through Confederate and again, ley lines, and emerged victorious time, dead on a Montana hillside, along with every man who had followed final fight him into his. The victory at Little Bighorn sent shockwaves through the Indian camp that would be felt for generations. Warriors who had participated in the battle would tell and retell the story of how they had defeated the famous Long Hair and his soldiers, how the vision of Sitting Bull had come to pass exactly as the holy man had prophesied. But even in the moment of theirest among the tribal greatest triumph, the Wiss leaders understood that this victory would ultimately seal their fate. The dust settled over the Little Bighorn on that scorching June afternoon, but the echoes of gunfire would reverberate through American history for decades to come. In the span of a few brutal hours, the golden-haired boy general had been transformed from national hero to cautionary tale, his name forever linked not to the glorious cavalry charges of Gettysburg, but to the blood-soaked hillside where his ambitions finally met their match. For Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and their warriors, the victory was complete but bittersweet. They had proven that united tribes could stand against the might of the United States Army, that their prophecies and visions held power beyond the white man's understanding. Yet the celebration would be short-lived. Within months, a nation shocked by Custer's defeat would demand vengeance, sending armies so vast that even the greatest gathering of Plains warriors could not hope to resist them. The Battle of the Little Bighorn was both the zenith and the twilight of Plains Indian resistance. It demonstrated the courage, tactical brilliance, and unity that these proud peoples could achieve when fighting for their very survival. But it also marked the beginning of the end for a way of life that had flourished on the Great Plains for countless generations. Today, the windswept hills of Montana stand as silent witnesses to one of the most dramatic confrontations between two worlds in American history, where the clash of cultures, the hunger for gold, and the price of pride converged in a bloodbath that changed the fate of a continent forever.